Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watches with Dennis. And I thought it would be a good day to do a live stream to go over three fairly recent watch announcements that I've seen and I thought would be worth us having a conversation about. And so before we get started, let me make sure I've got everything running the way I think it should be running. And hopefully everyone's been having a pretty good day. I'm wedging this in between some work meetings like I often do. But there we go. Make sure that I heard the sound. So the sound means it's working, and that's a great priority. So just in terms of some channel update stuff, obviously, I have not put out any first thought videos. I, of course, considered doing it for the Rolex Deepsea challenge, but I thought, you know what, it'll probably be easy enough to go ahead and cover that here, just given that. And I've got that. I've got a Christopher Ward watch I want to talk about. And I also want to talk about a new G-Shock that someone messaged me about earlier today. And I figured, you know what, we're just going to merge it all together and try and have some fun going through all of that during this lunch hour. So in terms of what I'm planning upcoming for the channel, those that are club members, which is 99 cents a month, plug, know this already. And greetings, Obese Tuna. Welcome to the live stream. I did get a new watch. I'm wearing it right now. It's a Cartier Santos 100. And my hope is to have the review out on Friday. That would mean I've had a week worth of time wearing the watch, which is my normal standard I shoot for when doing all this. And so I've actually I script those. I actually write a script, and then so that way I have something I can read while I'm showing the watch off. I've actually started drafting that script up. So barring any work fiascos that end up sucking all of my time away, I should be able to put that out sometime probably before the end of the day on Friday is my plan. But obviously I want to spend a little bit more time with the watch before I do the review. Might end up putting a few more scratches in on it too. I've dropped it once because this is my baby's first deployment strap. So that was a fun experience. So of course I put scratches in everything. And these bezels are super scratchy. So that's actually not the bad part yet. But it came in really good condition. Obviously, I bought it used because that is a used watch. What isn't a used watch are the three topics that we have today. So let's actually start with G-Shock. Let me make my head a tiny head and make the G-Shock a big old G-Shock. So this is one that a friend of mine messaged me about today. This is the DW5600 SMB, Super Mario Brother, get it, -4. So it's G-Shock collaboration with Super Mario Brothers. We're seeing a lot of these sort of collaborations for a while. I was going to say lately, but let's be honest, we've seen them for a while now. We've seen Swatch very recently has got their Dragon Ball Z collaboration watches. There is obviously the Moon Swatch collaboration. If we go back over to Seiko, they've got the Street Fighter collaboration. I think it's Street Fighter 4 technically, along with Naruto. Citizen does a lot of collaborations, of course, with Star Wars. Yes, good afternoon, Kevin. Hope things are going well in Florida for you. So again, a collaboration out of Casio. Not particularly surprising, I don't think. Super Mario Brothers is the hit game from the 1980s for a lot of us, people my age. This was really the first memorable experience with Mario. I probably did play the original non-Super Mario Brothers first. That was an arcade title, and we did start to get those on the home consoles eventually because it wasn't a particularly spec impressive game. But Super Mario Brothers was the one that was like really fun. It wasn't just designed to eat quarters. So this watch, again, if you're into Mario, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think I can just scroll these images. Yeah. So they've got this like camo. I thought this was camouflage at first, which I thought was a weird choice. And then I realized that it's actually little Marios, which is, I guess adorable. So that reminds me a lot about what Swatch does with the Dragon Ball watches. Like a lot of times the dial doesn't say a lot about the Dragon Ball character. The strap is in some ways more convincing to what it's representing, at least on some of them. I mean, they do have like a half dozen. Color combination obviously makes sense. Koopa shell here in the center. My biggest takeaway that I must say disappointed me was that this is not one of their solar cell watches. This uses a button battery, has approximately a 2-year life expectancy. I know a lot of G-Shocks do that. However, this is a $150 watch. And when you're at that price point with G-Shock, I kind of expect you to actually have a solar powered watch so that it can recharge, especially since I think people are going to want to play around with with the lighting and stuff. See, this is really cool. You're going to want to see that. You guys see your one-ups. You guys see your one-ups. See little Mario doing his little jump. You're going to want to make that glow. And of course, the more you push that 2-year life expectancy is not going to be reached. You're going to fall well short of it. So size-wise, this is pretty standard. I think it's just under 50 millimeters. We'll go down to the specs. I think it's just under 50 millimeters lug to lug. So 49 millimeter lug to lug, 44 millimeters approximately wide, which is pretty standard for G-Shock, about 13.5 millimeters thick. Mineral glass crystal, resin band, 200 meters water resistance, all the typical stuff. Yeah, okay. So it's using the CR 2016. So that's a fairly common battery to get a hold of. Has a lot of the typical features, which I won't sit on the screen on. I'll let you see more photos instead. But it's got the timer, it's got your stopwatch functionality and all of that under your various, what I think of as your standard G-Shock modes. So again, this is something that I found out about today and thought, okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. And the person who messaged me is not a watch person. They said they don't wear watches and that they would be willing to consider an 8-bit era watch if it was under $100. And I don't think they had loaded the price yet, because then I said, well, this is 150. And he was like, well, then no. I saw some other people, of course, when they see this, they think of other Nintendo properties. The very first comment I think I saw on I think it was on one of the watch forums, was just someone saying that they wished it was Zelda, which, of course, Legend of Zelda, probably just as iconic as Mario. I'd say Nintendo obviously has embraced Mario as their flagship character, but to a lot of people, I would say, it's tough because both games are really, really strong. I'd say overall, Legend of Zelda games probably rate higher. Mario had a few weak ones, and it gets weird because there's some non-mainline Mario games that, if you factor them in, kind of pull down his rating. But this isn't a video game YouTube channel, so we're going to really dive into that. But cool idea. I think it's a little pricey for its lack of. If it was solar and 150, I would be totally on board with this. It not being solar charged, I would have liked to have seen this closer to 100 rather than 150. That's really my only gripe with it. So Mario fans, just be aware if this is something you're into. Apparently, it comes in a round little can. My G-Shock I have didn't come in a can. It's not fair. I don't know the symbolism of the can. I guess the box kind of looks cool on a shelf, I suppose. Which I do save all the box. Well, I didn't say my G-Shock watch. It came one of those just like store display straps. It was a gift, so I snapped that thing, taking it off rather than undoing the band, and just pitched it in the trash. So I'd save my can though. If I had a can, yeah, I'd be all like that. That can's going to stick around for a while. So anyway, that was a last minute addition that I thought I'd go ahead and throw into this live stream just because I learned about this morning. We're going to save Rolex for last because everyone's talking about Rolex, and I'm going to drag it out. So let's talk about another. I'm going to call this an online watch darling, and maybe some of you in the chat have some feelings about Christopher Ward. I've never owned a Christopher Ward watch, but I did see in one of the watch groups that I'm a member of, when all of this Rolex Deepsea challenge was being talked about, they're like, well, why aren't we talking about Christopher Ward's C1 Bel Canto? So let's talk about it here, even though I don't know much about it. So the Bel Canto, I'm familiar with Christopher Ward. Like, I've heard other people talk about it. I've watched several watch reviews from other YouTubers who have walked through and spoken about Christopher Ward. Generally speaking, I've heard fairly glowing terms. I mean, I'm trying to think about like controversies with Christopher Ward, and I can really only think of like debates about the name Christopher Ward appearing on the dial and how much space it took up back when they were doing that. And I think fairly recently, not this watch, but another watch that I didn't really give any time to. As I recall, Christopher Ward was the watch company that kind of turned to its buying community and asked them to make choices about things that they then put into a watch. So it was like a community developed watch, which on paper I think sounds like a terrible idea, but the watch may have turned out well. I don't know. I just think it's I think design by committee is risky, and I think design by mass mob, just not to say that they're incapable of being artisanal well, it's a mass mob though. So it's hard to have a design theme when maybe you're voting for your favorite feature and those things don't always align. Like, they could be mutually exclusive, but I digress. So let's talk about the Bel Canto, because I don't think this came up from a community demand. This is a chime watch. Now, Actually, I have a load up, and I'll show it later because when I was reading this review on Worn and Wound, and I have a link to these resources in my description. If anyone who's watching this live or on recording wants to go and read up more, because I don't do a great job, just go and you can pull all the details and photos to your heart's content. So this watch is a chiming unit watch, and Meister Singer I knew had a watch like that. I remember because I looked at it, briefly considered buying one, and I'll talk about that in a little while, but because it's actually mentioned in the review. But you can see a dial here, 12 o'clock positions off on the left. And so what the way this watch works is not a minute repeater. It's not an alarm watch in the sense that you are not pushing something for it to tell you the time via audio, which is a minute repeater, and you're not setting a time in which an alarm goes off once that time is reached, which an alarm watch does. Instead, this is allowed to chime on the hour. So when a new hour is reached, the watch makes a chime sound. So anyway, this review is very, very glowing. The chime is attractive. It's a nice ding. It's a true ding. It's not like if you've heard alarm watches, they're usually very caustic. Well, kind of the stereotypical sort of sound. A little bit less, I'd say, clocks, like when you think about a cartoon clock with the little bells, that's a little more attractive than the watch version, which usually sounded a little more aggressive in my view. Granted, you don't have the ability to make a huge old bell and sort of stick it in the watch without consuming a ton of real estate. So they, in this instance, much like a minute repeater, have gone for a true chime option. I won't play the sound here because it's not right at the start of the video, and it'll be hard to pick up on the microphone. Just go and play the YouTube if you're curious about it. But so it chimes at the top of the hour, and but understand that this talks a lot about high complication. This article about high complications and such. It's like it's not chiming like 11 times when it's 11 o'clock. Okay, it's a chime. It's one chime. It's very simplistic. Attractive sound, yes. Simplistic, yes. More advanced than a simple three-handed watch, yes. Useful, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no, and that's part of the reason why I never went with the Meister Singer that I saw. So, in terms of all of this, my biggest issue with this watch is I don't think it's attractive. So, setting aside the chiming hour gimmick, which is neat. I mean, there aren't a lot of watches that do it. Again, I could only name that Meister Singer, the Bell Aura, which we'll look at in a moment. But they've chosen to allow you to see the chiming mechanism, as you can kind of see here in this photo from Worn and Wound, which again, I get it. I've recently, on the last live stream I did, talked a bit about that chronograph that Omega has come out with, too, actually. And they have a chiming feature that tells you the time on the chrono. No, so it's not a minute repeater, but it does actually ring out the time that's been registered on the chronograph. And they wanted you to be able to see the hammers and stuff. And they did it up really attractively. This is not remotely as attractively done up. It's still kind of cool. So I can see the desire to put it on the dial. However, because of that, you've sacrificed, in my opinion, you've sacrificed a lot. You're only consuming approximately the top half of the watch for the main purpose of the watch, which is to tell the time. Bear in mind, this ain't a minute repeater. The audio is not going to tell you the time. All it's going to do is chirp at you every time you reach a new hour. So I kind of get it. It's interesting. They put their name on the dial. The name's on the crown, but it's not on the dial. They've kept it very staid to really show off the bottom half of the chiming unit. And then there's some time telling, basically skeletonized time telling feature up at the top. It's not ugly, but I don't think it's very attractive. I mean, the chime thing, you can see it's taking up a ton of space. It looks pretty basic. It's not impressively finished. And when you see the price, you'll understand why. But I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if I would show it off this hardcore versus just pointing out that does have a really attractive sound. I mean, compared to an alarm watch, this is great. But so here's a close up of that dial, so you can see what I mean. It's very industrial, and I think if you're really into the industrial look, this will probably appeal to you. I've always struggled with industrial looking watches. I mean, I guess like this Santos with the screws and the bezel is about as close as I can get. When I first saw Royal Oaks, I felt they looked too industrial. Again, screws in the bezel, all of that. I've come around a lot to the Royal Oak. It's not a watch that I'm interested in owning, but I don't find it visually unattractive anymore. Like I still do the Nautilus. The Nautilus I still don't think is an attractive watch. because of its shape. But I think that's less industrial and more just a little too pure 70s in a way I don't like versus some of the Zenith stuff, which I do. But I'm digressing. So here's what I mentioned about the crown being signed. So you can see that's the Christopher Ward logo. Takes up a lot less space, obviously, than spelling out the whole name did. So they're going to a lot of logo branding now, which I think makes a lot of sense. Totally logical. And pricing. So the pricing is like 3,500 to 4,000. I think it's 36 to 4. Yeah, here we go. So, all right, you can get it on a leather strap, $3,600. You can get it on a titanium bracelet, and it's a titanium watch. So $4,000 there. Not bad. I mean, price wise, given that it has a not a grand complication, but it does have a complication to it, $4,000 is not obscene. I think a lot of people might balk at the movement because I believe this is just a Solita with some conversion on it. Size wise, I think this is very ideal, very smart move on the sizing. So it's 41 millimeter watch, lug to lug is about 48 millimeters. As I noted, the watch is titanium. It's grade 5 if you care, grade 5 titanium. It's about 13 millimeters thick. So 41, 13 thick, and 48 lug to lug. That's kind of like in my mind, modern standard sweet spot men's watch size, right? Like 40, that I'd say 39 to 42 is like where most of those watches are at this point. Anything under 50 millimeters lug to lug, it's generally not going to be too big for people. 13 millimeters thick is not dress watch slip under the cuff, but it's not like 15 plus millimeter obscene either. So overall, I think they balance that pretty well. And given that it's titanium, this has got to be a fairly light watch too. So I'm not sure if they've listed just how much the weight is on it. I don't usually pay attention because if I get a watch on a bracelet, it depends how many links are in it, right? So something. Okay. So here we go. So they use the FS01 movement, which is a chiming module on top of an SW200. And I like the Solita SW200 just fine. I think I have a watch powered, but I think my Stova is powered by the SW200. And my Ming that I used to have, I actually traded it to get this Cartier. I think the Ming was a modified SW200 by Schwartz Etienne to do the weird jump. It wasn't weird, but when it didn't work when they first sent them out. But that jumping hour was a modification because the Solitas by default don't do that. Though this noted that this was based on Christopher Ward had a jump hour watch before. So it's using some of the technology of their jump hour to be able to know and trigger the chime, which hits upon the hour, as we mentioned earlier. So not too bad, and I think price-wise, this is more competitive than the Meister Singer, and both this is limited, so it's only 300 pieces. So it's not for everyone. I think a lot of Christopher Ward fans are going to go for this. Feature-wise, though, as I've noted, the chime it's one of those things that's not super practical. And to bring back up that Ming 1709 with the jump hour, it's kind of like that, but less so. So when I got the Ming Messina Lab 1709, the jump hour feature was cool, but it only jumped forward. So it's like the practicality of it was a struggle for me. Like I have a Rolex Explorer 2, and it jumps both ways, and that makes sense for a travel watch, right? Because if I'm in Central Time, so if I go to the East Coast and I need to move forward an hour, both the Ming and the Rolex jump hour meet my needs. And then when I fly back home, I just jump the hour back on the Explorer 2. But with the Ming, you had to jump 23 hours forward because it couldn't go backwards. And so it's like a gimmick that because no matter where you go, you're going to have to go the other way eventually, right? If you went West Coast, you'd have to jump a whole bunch, and then you only save time coming back. So my point is, it's like, because it doesn't go both ways, to me, it falls in the realm of gimmick rather than the realm of practicality. Church bells chiming on the hour is something we associate with big bell towers. It's not something we need out of watches, really. It's not a very useful feature, and that doesn't even chime out the time, which a lot of church towers do. Means audibly, all it tells you is you're at the start of the hour, and you still have to have good situational awareness. Now, I mentioned the Meister Singer, so I just want to show you the photo of it. See, this Meister Singer, if you're not familiar with them, a German brand, very fond of doing one-handed dials. So a lot of it's hard to sort of tell the time. Time is not to be so slavishly adhered to, sort of things. However you want to poetically spin it. But the dial is way more attractive in my view than the Christopher Ward. Now, this watch I believe is more expensive. I'm not sure if their article here really gets into it, but I think it's closer to. I think it's over $4,000. And again, Salida 200 movement, which is I think that's generally what Meister Singer turns to for all of their watches or versions of Salidas, because they do a lot of kind of simple gimmicks, simple complication things. Like they'll do jump hours, and obviously they'll do chime units and stuff. Yeah, I don't see the pricing here, but you see, I just find it a lot more attractive. Simple dial. Obviously, the single hand in and of itself is a gimmick, and it just chimes, and that's fine. But it's clean, and I like that. Whereas the Christopher Ward, just not for me. I just don't like this industrial look and the all to show off the complication that's not very interesting to me. So I was a little disappointed when when someone was like, why aren't people talking about this? Well, I'd say, well, because it's not a very useful complication. It's not a very attractive watch, but obviously that's just my opinion. Those of you listening or watching have thoughts on it, share your comments, because obviously my view is just one view out of many. So let me take a drink here as I pause, and we're going to jump into the big news that everyone's talking about, because it's Rolex, and everyone's got to talk about Rolex, right? Because they make 1 million watches a year that are hard to get somehow. All right. So Rolex, they've come out with a new dive watch, not a new version of the Submariner. It's a new version of the Sea Dweller that they call the Rolex Deepsea Challenge, and it's made out of titanium. Now, Rolex has played with titanium before. They've done parts of watches in titanium. I discovered that yesterday because I didn't know that Rolex had ever done anything in titanium. That's, unique metals is something that I associate with Tudor. And with Rolex, it always seems to be steel, or they're going to do some version of gold or platinum, precious metal sorts of stuff that they tend to do. But I don't really think about them with non-precious metals aside from their 904 steel that they like to do. So here is the Deepsea Challenge watch, and it's in what they call RLX titanium. It's grade that they admit it's grade 5 titanium. I don't know why they have to brand all their metals special names, but they branded it a special name. Just be aware it's grade 5. So officially, it's got 11,000. You can kind of see it on we'll find a better photo here that we can pull up. It's got 11,000 meters of water resistance. So I believe this has now officially set the new record for depth on a watch. And I think the article here from A Blog to Watch, which again is linked in the description, does explain what the actual depth rating is, because they exceed what they print on the dial by a certain amount. And so I think it's closer to like 13,000 plus meters technically. Regardless, it's very, very impressive depth amount. Now, what was necessary to achieve this, though, is shocking. Now, watch price officially is $26,000. I view this as an experimental watch that I was going to say not a lot of people will buy. I think there are some that either because they love everything Rolex, or the flex of having a kind of hard to get Rolex, which applies to a lot of their watches. I mean, right now things are getting better, but it's still very difficult to secure a lot of Rolex models. I think it'll sell. I don't think it's going to outsell regular Sea Dwellers or subs or anything, not remotely, but there'll be some people that latch onto this, even though the practicality of this watch is shockingly non-existent in my view. Just completely not meant for human wearing. And that, again, just my opinion on it. But so here we are. Okay, they've done the titanium, which keeps it lighter. Yeah. That's all great. It's gone deep. It's hard not to read this and get the vibe that they were really bothered by Omega having those deep watches that they came out with earlier this year, the production versions of their experimental watch. And so Rolex needed to set a higher record to kind of put Omega in its place. But the problem, in my opinion, the problem with that is it looks weird for Rolex to be competing with Omega like that. Like, why should Rolex feel compelled to do something like this, especially when it doesn't feel like that's the direction they've been taking the company recently? And I'll elaborate a little more on my opinion on that in a moment. But so here we go. I mean, understand though, 11,000 meters is completely impractical. Like, no human being needs that. People don't swim out with their watches in 11,000 meters of water depth. So, like, practically speaking, it's ridiculous. It's been, the Omega was ridiculous. They've been setting ridiculous records that have no human application at all for quite a while, and this is all just about flexing the tech specs, which I get. This is not the thickness of the watch. 9 millimeters would be a thin watch. 9 millimeters is the thickness of the sapphire on this thing. So it's giving you a sense as to just how massive this watch is. This thing is thick, THICC, and it's thick in all ways, not just in thickness, but the watch is a 50 millimeter diameter. I think I've got the Hodinkee article. I like Hodinkee's stat summary on the end. This stuff is scary. So 50 millimeter, not 40, not 45, guys. It's 50 millimeter diameter watch. But more importantly, I think 61 millimeters lug to lug. My wrist size is about 6 3/4 of an inch, so 6.75 inches. I was terrified is a strong word because I mean it's just watches. But when I got my IWC Portuguese, the one with the pocket watch movement that I recently reviewed, that thing had a 52 millimeter lug to lug, and I was very worried about pulling it off. I have decided I will not go higher than what that Portuguese was. So 61 to me seems like, other than maybe if you've got over an 8-inch wrist, it would be okay. I cannot fathom that this is gonna. I mean, it's not. Look at this thing. It's not curved. These lugs do not hug your wrist. This thing is a block. I was going to say a block of steel, but it is a block of titanium. It is not going to wear gracefully at all. So it's just going to look ridiculous, I think, on most people that would buy it. Again, speaking to the lack of practicality in my view. And then we talked about the 9.5 millimeter sapphire. The total thickness is 23 millimeters. I don't know of any other watch in existence I'm sure there's got to be one that's thicker, but 23 millimeters is ridiculously thick. You're not going to put that under anything. You're not going to, I don't even know you could wear a winter coat over it. It's ridiculously thick. So all that being said, here's I will say the clasp, I think the Blog to Watch has a good view of the clasp. It looks nice, like it has on the Deepseas. Rolex's clasps and bracelets are great. My Oyster Perpetual I have has got like my favorite clasp of any watch I own, and it doesn't have the full secure locking and glide lock or anything. It's just the like little clam lift and stuff, but it just feels really good. Of course, it helps that that's a 34 millimeter watch, and it ain't no 20 plus millimeters thick. So here's my thing with it, as I will shut that down and talk a bit about why I think this wasn't the best move on Rolex. It's fine. Like, I get it. It's a tech flex. It's not meant for human beings to wear. Yes, there are human beings that will buy it. Yes, there are human beings that will wear it. Yes, there are human beings that will argue that in some way it is meaningfully practical. Like, there's a reason why you should want to wear it over other more, in my view, practical dive watches from Rolex. That's all personal preference, of course. All personal preference. I think it looks bad-ish for a couple of reasons. The first I already touched on. Omega has been really trying to, for years now, as part of their multi-pronged strategy of why they want you to buy Omega rather than Rolex, one of those prongs has been, we've got better tech specs for the price. Now, Omegas are generally just cheaper than Rolex watches in general. So as long as they tied the tech specs, they would probably win. I mean, the only thing I can think of that Omega seems to regularly lag on versus Rolex watches is the service interval. Like, they're not up to the 10-year service interval that Rolex offers. Rolex has that robustness going for them. But in terms of, movement accuracy and depth rating and all of that, Omega generally, for the whatever the equivalent Omega is to whatever Rolex what we're trying to one for one, the Omega a lot of times does have the better specs on paper. So Omega does some Deepsea stuff, and you're like, okay, yeah, they've set a ridiculously sized, ridiculous depth, non-human being needing watch, and Rolex chooses to respond. And I just think it's weird. It's Rolex. Why respond to your inferior. If you are indeed superior, responding to your inferior is suggesting that you're intimidated or you're worried or you think you have to do something like that Omega strategy is working. And maybe it is. I know plenty of people who think Omega strategy should be working and that Omega should be respected more than Rolex. And so, given that, this is kind of, in my view, playing into Omega's hands. It's like Rolex has been looking and going, oh no, Omega is beating us on sports watch specs. We need to come out and just put them in their place and dump a ton of money into an impractical watch and win the record back because we're Rolex and we should be number one. The other aspect that I think is odd about it is this does not, to me, feel like the strategy that makes sense for Rolex. What Rolex hasn't for years now been leaning into their tech specs, other than like service interval, right? Like better power reserves, better service interval. They make incredibly robust watches and incredibly comfortable watches. But when we see their new versions come out, it seems like what Rolex, to me, has been communicating through their watch releases, like their two-tone Explorer ones and stuff, is that they want to be a luxury watchmaker. That's what their prices say. We want to be a luxury watchmaker. Let's make this sports watch in gold. Why? Why you would never do the sport activity in a gold watch? Well, because we're Rolex and we're going to do it. Okay. So if you want to be in the realm of Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and Vacheron Constantin, then why aren't you doing more flexing on high horology instead of winning pointless spec battles with Omega? That's what confuses me. This is what I would like to see out of Rolex. I'm not in the market for luxury, gold watches from Rolex. But if that's the realm that they want to be in, if the rarefied air that they feel they deserve is on that end, is to be in competition with the dollar of the Patek buyer, not in competition with the dollar of the Omega buyer, then going and putting 11,000 dive meters on a watch is pointless. What they should be doing is looking into minute repeaters, annual calendars, tourbillons, and all other sorts of grand complications. Rolex doesn't do grand complications. And I mean, you could talk about the interesting aspects of the Sky Dweller, and I think they've done some things of horological complication significance in the past, but like they have nothing mainline production that's honestly very mechanically impressive. Like they're not mechanically flexing. They put on a huge chunk of titanium and stuck in a big old sapphire crystal and said, look at me, be impressed. And I'm not impressed by it because it's just this incremental battle. I wasn't impressed when Omega did it either, earlier this year and said, let's produce these things. Let's show Rolex who's boss. And then Rolex is like, all right, yeah, okay, we better do something about this. Like, if that was where you think your market is at this point, I mean, it's a $26,000 watch, guys. I mean, at that point, you can go used and probably get yourself a Longa Zona or something. Like a Longa one, not just like the Saxony or whatever they call it, the cheaper one. I just don't get it. It's like that doesn't seem to be the pond Rolex wants to play in anymore. They have tried and true, conservatively iterated upon sports watches. I just don't understand why we would go and necessarily do this. It's not that they shouldn't, but it doesn't seem to be where any of their marketing is. Like all of their other stuff is we want people to spend $50,000 on our watches. And to me, that means you need to start learning how to do real watchmaking and do some grand complications instead of hiding behind your robust cases and thinking that just because you dump diamonds into them and make them out of gold, that means we should pay you $50,000. Again, just my view on it. I do see O'Neill is in the chat and has provided some commentary stating that Rolex has historically competed with Omega on their sports model, which I do agree with. And also knowing that looking back in history, and Rolex has beat Omega to the punch on so many fronts, but they both have their eye on each other, and that's been a good thing for innovation. I would concur in general. However, this sort of depth stuff is pointless, right? I mean, because human beings can't swim at these depths. So there's no point in having an 11,000 meter watch, just like there was no point in having a 10,000 meter watch. I get that it's a flex and it's showing that they came up with a way to do something that had never been done before. And so we climb a mountain because it's there, I get it. But in why a buyer should, stepping aside from the craft and the gumption, all the gumption we've seen, like it's not practical. It's so impractical. I mean, look at the proportions of this watch. We'll throw it back up here from the Hodinkee summary. The proportions of this watch are completely, that this is not just a prototype and that this is a production model. I find so weird. 50 millimeter diameter, 61 millimeter lug to lug, 23 millimeter thick. Yes, they kept it light by going titanium, but otherwise, this is not a watch that human beings sane human beings would put on their wrist, even to dive with, because they're smaller, sleeker, functional watches that are more comfortable to wear than this, that would meet every specification you would need times 3. So that's the part that I just think is so weird. That they want to compete with Omega on a sports watch front makes sense to me. I just don't know that this was the right way to do it. I don't think it was wrong per se. It's Rolex. It'll sell too. So again, this is all just my view, but I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I kind of like, why not experiment with putting a 5 hertz movement in their Daytona finally, and having 10-year service interval on that? That'd be an interesting spec thing, wouldn't it? I mean, back when they took the El Primero movements, they still toned them down to 4 hertz. But if we want 10th of a second measurement, we need 5. So that would be a flex that I think would be interesting. Be like, okay, yeah, Zenith does 5 hertz chronographs, but if Rolex is like, well, we're going to give you a 10-year service interval, and we're going to stick it in the Daytona, and it's going to do all of this, and be, we're going to be more robust and offer you this high beat accuracy sort of thing. That's what I'm interested in, or what I'm not interested in, but I think fits with where their pricing has been going, because it's very difficult to get in much in the way of, from an authorized dealer, Rolex under 10,000 at this point. Is more on those complications, grand complications. Like, why do we not? To me, it's weird to just still be celebrating the day date from Rolex, when at the price that watch is at, we should probably be talking annual calendars now, right? More than just the day and the date. But they just don't seem to be interested in playing in that pond. But that's where the prices are, or where I think they want their prices to go. I think Rolex wants to sell $100,000 watches, and that's not the market for me, but more power to them. I mean, if you ask someone to name a luxury watch brand, a common person, they're going to say Rolex. So why not do more high horology? And don't forget, Omega is too. Like, Omega had that chrono. We talked about it on the live stream last week. Omega had that chronograph that came out, I want to call it the chrono repeater, because it's not a minute repeater, but it chimes out the chronograph times. I mean, that's a grand complication. So why isn't Rolex dealing with that? Because I think that's the bigger threat from Omega. Like, again, Omega seems to has a multi-pronged strategy here, and I'm not sure what Rolex's strategy is. And Rolex might not need a strategy. I mean, it's very difficult for me to imagine Omega seriously displacing them as the big dog of the watch that people think that you need to buy if you want to get your first nice watch. And hi, BJ, welcome to the live stream. I had someone message me 2 days ago, I think. Excuse me, getting a little parched. And he knows me from pinball, which is, that's my play field back there, which show is one of my other hobbies. And he's like, Dennis, I'm really thinking about getting my first nice luxury watch. And of course, the way he's thinking is he only wants one, right? He doesn't think he's going to be a watch collector. He wants one really nice watch. And of course, Rolex was one of the first things he wrote out. And he's right to do so. My very first nice watch was a Rolex. It was all I knew. And they make a very impressive watch. But the pricing back when I bought was a lot different than it is now. And it's not just inflation. Like, they're moving their prices up market. And I just don't see 11,000 meter watches as aligning with that. I feel that that's more of a where you need to do grand complications, not have James Cameron beat up whoever Omega's using. I was going to say Jacques Cousteau, but I think he's long since departed this world. So anyway, now visually, I didn't comment on my thoughts on, like, I have always liked the look of the Submariner and the Sea Dweller. So, like, visually, other than this being a big old thick boy, like bigger than a Hardee's hamburger, I like the look. It's very text heavy. This is like a page out of Tudor. So we got Rolex, Oyster Perpetual, Deepsea Challenge, and then towards the 6 o'clock Sea Dweller, the depth rating, and of course your usual superlative chronometer officially certified, which kudos to them for being able to keep it as a superlative chronometer with all this other modification they had to do to achieve this. I don't know about this. Like, I guess because the dial's so small because of the movement size, they felt they had to fill the 50 meters millimeters with something. So this original gas escape valve ring lock system, like like, does anyone really need to see that on the watch, like written on the watch? That's something you'd normally engrave in the case back, right? So that looks a little lazy, I suppose. They've blended it well, so like it matches with the titanium and the dial, matte black dial, really clean. So it's not ugly per se, other than when here, we're watch people, right? So when we talk about watches, we often discuss like excessive text and things that detract away from the cleanness of a dial. That the dial in and of itself was already fairly busy with all the spec stuff. The gas escape valve ring lock thing is just like I almost think it's a parody, but it's Rolex and they don't have a sense of humor. So, so I think they were very serious about it. But anyway, those were the three topics I wanted to talk about. I don't know if there was any questions or anything. Obviously, we're well under an hour. I don't promise an hour. I try and bookmark at least an hour of time, otherwise I won't schedule one of these because I'll be pushing up against meetings. But it's curious and it's interesting, and I love seeing different perspectives. I've seen on two different watch groups already multiple people saying they're going to try and buy this. They love it, so it's meeting some sort of demand. So I mean, that's cool. It's always cool to see new watches, even if I don't like them. But so Anil has said Omega has long tried to maintain its high horology roots. Their central dial tourbillon is out of this world. Their world timer competes with the big boys. Excellent point about the world timer as well. I did a world timer video, I think a few months ago, and I had to include theirs because it's one of the most visually attractive ones in my view. I'm not a big world timer person myself, but I've had people write into the channels asking me about world timer, and it's like, look at the Omega one, just because of the way they've represented the Earth on it and everything. Like, they've really just embraced the world timeriness of the whole thing, and it doesn't just feel like busy text in my view. It's one of the better looking. So Anil says, so I'd submit that it's Omega that's trying to compete with Rolex by going upstream horologically. And they have to, because Rolex has beaten them in the sports watch game. I do think that's a fair argument. The only catch to it, like, Rolex is ahead of Omega on any measurable front that I can think of commercially. Like, they have better name recognition. Their watches hold value better. They're better known in the world, that, all those sort of things. I'm not talking spec to spec. I'm just talking like consumer awareness, brand awareness, brand value, right? There's no debate, right? It's Rolex really pretty much above everyone. So I could see why that one could say that's why Omega's going the high horology route. The thing that I'm curious about, especially as we, move closer and closer, it appears, into recessionary territory, is Rolex is moving their prices up way more aggressively than Omega has, right? So what's a no date Submariner authorized dealers just under 9,000, I think, at this point. The Rolex Explorer 2, a historically unpopular watch, is a little over it's around $9,200. Dated sub now is AD at over $10,000. I mean, we're getting close to Blancpain prices at this point on the dive watch front, because what's a Blancpain? Bath Escape somewhere in like 12.5-ish, I think. So my question is, because Rolex seems to want to drive the prices up more and more, just at what point does the scale tip too much to the extreme and you fall off the cliff for a sports watch, right? There's a limit, right? To some point. Is it 80 Nautilus pricing of 32,000? Like, is that the tipping point? Like, at some point it's too expensive, right? So this watch, the Deepsea thingy kaboober, is 26,000. So it's not the most expensive steel. And again, this is titanium, not steel. But it's not the most expensive non-precious metal sports watch on the market by several $1,000s. It's not. So, but Rolex has seemed to be wanting to put their toe, or maybe their whole leg, into the pool of really expensive watches. But the way they've been doing it, and I know Cellini wasn't particularly successful, but the way they've been doing it is just by like saying, let's just dip everything in gold and sprinkle some diamonds on it. So that's where I'm curious. Like, if they want to sell $50,000 watches, do they do that by just making gold versions of Explorers and subs? Or do they say, you know what, let's start competing with Patek and AP, um, or Vacheron, probably the most vulnerable of the three, and saying, let's start sticking in some complications in addition to doing things just in precious metal. That's where I'm curious. And again, it's out of my price point, so I don't favor that they do that. My interest in Rolex are their sports watches, but I'm just curious, like, where they're trying to go. Because I don't, as far as I'm aware, they don't need to go anywhere, right? They're already succeeding on all fronts. I don't know that they had to beat the spec on Omega, because Omega's so far beneath them in consumer awareness that I just don't think they thought they were a threat. I've always assumed that Rolex has been positioning Tudor to be Omega's competitor, which I think Omega hates to no end, which is why I feel like Omega's been trying to drive their prices up to try and keep up while still being the cheaper option with Rolex. But it's these are my guesses. It's tough to say. So let's see other chat comments. BJ says, I wish they would use their resources to up production on current models instead of putting out this watch. I mean, I don't know how many of these are going to build. I would assume it won't be too many, but Rolex does have a vested interest, I would assume, in keeping production at around 1 million a year I mean, it's weird to me to say, look at this luxury watch brand and they make 1 million of it. 1 million watches a year it's so many watches, so hard. It's so hard to convey to people. It's so many watches. Let's talk like Zodiac. Fossil Group owns Zodiac, right? I think last year, I saw someone from Zodiac say they made less than 4,000 watches under the Zodiac label. I mean, so just like, and Zodiac's a famous brand, and they've been really trying to pull, they're pulling from the back catalog and all. I have a Zodiac. It's just 1 million's a lot of watches. And I wonder if Rolex worries if they up production that the watches will be part of the desire is to see what their value is on the secondhand market. And so if they put out more, does it undermine the preciousness of the brand because it's become too easy to get? I don't know, because it didn't seem like it used to be a problem to be able to walk in. Like I got my Explorer 2, which is a 16570. I bought it used. It was less than it sold for new, which is how used watches should be. And back then, this was like 15 years ago. Just for context, I think I paid $34.50 for it. So anyway, it's just one of those things. Neil says the tipping point is much closer to the gray market average price, and you're probably right about that. And he said, also notes, in many minds, they already do compete with Patek. Look at auction prices. They've nudged into the top 10 highest sold watches along with Patek. And that is a fair point. I'm thinking like from the AD sales price point, though, is kind of where my headspace is at. And they do it currently. I mean, not talking like the ultra extreme, like piece unique stuff out of Patek, of course, but Rolex has some really expensive, again, but it's all by bling. It's all by blinging them out. It's not like arguing, hey, look, we came up with this peripheral rotor on the edge of the watch with a display case back and a new column wheel clutch chronograph and a perpetual calendar or something that tracks leap year. It's just, we bedazzled it, which works for a certain audience, but I think if they don't want to go high complication, they probably don't have to. I just think it would be an interesting place to flex at this point rather than seemingly silly things like, well, we go out a few hundred more meters depth than Omega did. Like, yeah, but Omega's watch was already stupid large and stupid spec, like stupid as in like human beings don't use that. We're talking about strapping them onto machines that barely survive going down. It's cool, but it's also impractical. So yes, that's kind of where I'm at with it. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the live stream here. Thanks everyone who participated in the live chat and for giving your thoughts. I really do appreciate it. It's good to hear differing opinions. If you're watching this on record, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section about what do you think? You think O'Neill's right in the flex competition on the sports side is really where Rolex should be competing, because that's where Omega is trying to bite at their heels. What do you think of a Rolex on high horology? Going back, what do you think of Christopher Ward doing a chiming watch or Mario being on a G-Shock? Of course, we did talk about those topics as well. And otherwise, my next video probably won't be a live stream. Probably will be the review of the Santos 100. So again, I hope to have that out some point on Friday. Uh, my completing my write up and doing filming, assuming all that goes to plan. But otherwise, I'll talk to everyone on the next one. Take care, everybody.